My name is Vanessa. I am 29 years old. At a recent family dinner, my sister's 8-year-old son threw his heavy silver fork directly at my chest. It left a dark stain on my silk blouse and a sharp sting on my collarbone. When I gasped, he simply laughed and said his mom told him I was just the help. Instead of correcting him, the entire dining table erupted in laughter. I quietly got up and left the house. That night, my sister texted me telling me to know my place. I replied saying I knew exactly where my place was and that she should probably check the status of her mortgage. By dawn, their bank started calling non-stop. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth and used you as their scapegoat. The warm Atlanta evening air was thick with the rich smell of expensive barbecue smoked brisket and the sound of classic R&B music playing softly from the hidden outdoor speakers. My parents were hosting their annual early summer cookout at their sprawling suburban estate in an exclusive neighborhood. It was supposed to be a joyous family gathering, but in my household, it was just another theatrical stage for my parents to show off their golden child, my older sister Monica, and her husband Spencer. I was sitting quietly at the edge of the patio, minding my own business and eating my meal when the heavy silver fork suddenly hit me. The sharp metal tine struck my collarbone right above the neckline of my cream silk blouse, leaving a thick smear of dark barbecue sauce across the delicate fabric. I gasped in absolute shock, dropping my hands to my lap and looked up to see where the projectile had come from. My 8-year-old nephew Jackson was standing just a few feet away, pointing at me with a smug, satisfied grin that belonged on the face of an arrogant grown man, not a child. I asked him what he thought he was doing and told him he could have seriously hurt me. Jackson just giggled, shrugged his shoulders and announced loudly to the entire patio that his mom told him I was just the help and that I should be the one to clean up his mess. A heavy silence fell over the manicured yard for a split second. I waited for anyone to scold him. Instead, a chorus of laughter erupted from the main dining table. I looked over and saw my mother Brenda actually wiping a tear of mirth from her eye, as if this was the pinnacle of comedy. Monica, my 32-year-old sister, was covering her mouth with a manicured hand to muffle her giggles. Her husband Spencer, a 35-year-old white tech entrepreneur who always looked like he was auditioning for a country club magazine cover, took a slow, deliberate sip of his imported craft beer. He strolled over to me with that infuriatingly arrogant smirk he always wore around my family. "Come on, Vanessa," he drawled, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear over the music. "You work as a debt liquidator, right? You push trashy paper and clean up financial messes for a living. Cleaning up this plate and picking up a little fork suits you perfectly. Do not make a huge deal out of a kid just playing around. You are taking yourself way too seriously for someone in your tax bracket." I stared at Spencer, feeling the familiar heat of righteous anger rising in my chest. But before I could formulate a single word, my mother chimed in from the head of the long teakwood table. "Do not wear that ugly scowl on your face, Vanessa." My mother scolded, her voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension she reserved exclusively for me. Spencer just closed a massive new funding round for his tech startup today. He is bringing serious generational wealth into this family and making sure your sister lives the affluent lifestyle she was raised to expect. Monica is happy, and she is already stressed enough with planning her upcoming charity gala for the hospital. Do not bring your jealous, bitter attitude into this celebration. You have been holding a ridiculous grudge ever since Monica was crowned prom queen and went off to pledge her elite sorority while you stayed stuck in the background. My mother always found a convenient way to drag the past into the present, painting me as the envious shadow to Monica's shining light. Growing up in our status-obsessed household in Atlanta, everything was strictly about appearances. We were part of the elite Jack and Jill social circles, and my parents expected us to marry well, maintain a pristine image, and socialize only with the right kind of people. Monica played their game flawlessly. She was the beauty queen, the ultimate socialite, the one who married the flashy white tech bro who promised to elevate our family portfolio to new heights. I was the dark-skinned, practical daughter who chose a solid state school instead of a prestigious, historically black college and built a career in what my parents dismissively called boring paper pushing. They did not understand what distressed asset management actually meant. To them, I was just a glorified collection agent embarrassing their upper-class image. My father DeAndre walked over, holding a pair of stainless steel grilling tongs. He looked at my ruined blouse, and then at Jackson, who was now hiding behind Monica's designer summer dress. "Vanessa, your mother is absolutely right," my father said, his tone utterly dismissive. "You are 29 years old and still single. You spend all your time hidden away in some dreary office looking at spreadsheets while Spencer is out here building an empire and networking with the elite. You should be taking notes from him instead of getting easily offended by a child. Jackson is just expressing himself. Maybe if you focused more on upgrading your boring life and less on holding on to childhood resentment, you would understand how real success works in the real world. Be a team player for once and just let the boy be." Monica chimed in, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet so it caught the evening sun. "Seriously, Vanessa, you are acting so sensitive. Spencer works incredibly hard to provide for us, and he is under a lot of pressure right now. The least you can do is not cause a dramatic scene at Dad's cookout. Just go to the kitchen, wash your shirt, and grab Jackson a new plate of ribs. It is not rocket science. It is just being helpful to the family." They stood there, forming a united front of pure arrogance and delusion. My mother with her pristine pearls, my father with his expensive golf polo Monica, with her maxed-out designer lifestyle, and Spencer, the ultimate savior of the family, looking down at me as if I were dirt on his expensive loafers. They had built their entire reality around the illusion of Spencer's immense wealth, using me as the designated punching bag to make themselves feel superior. They assumed my silence over the years was a sign of weakness. They thought my practical career meant I was struggling financially while they lived in mansions and drove luxury leased vehicles. They had absolutely no idea who they were actually talking to, and they had no idea that I held the keys to their entire existence. I did not argue with them. I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear of frustration. I had spent my entire childhood and most of my adult life trying to prove my worth to people who were entirely committed to misunderstanding me. I was completely done pleading for basic respect from people who thrived on disrespecting me. I looked down at the dark barbecue sauce staining my favorite silk blouse, then looked up at my young nephew who was brazenly sticking his tongue out at me from behind his mother's skirt. Finally, my gaze settled on Spencer, who was still smirking, waiting for me to lose my temper, so he could easily label me as an angry black woman and invalidate my feelings completely. Instead of giving him that satisfaction, I reached into my premium leather tote bag and pulled out my wallet. The air on the patio felt thick and unnaturally still as they watched my calm movements. I retrieved a crisp $100 bill from my wallet and placed it gently on the wooden table right next to the dirty silver fork Jackson had thrown at my chest. "What is that money for?" my mother asked, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "That is for the cleaning service," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. "Because clearly you are going to need one for this mess. I am not the help. I never have been, and I never will be." I picked up my tote bag, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and turned my back on them without another word. "Where do you think you are going?" my father demanded, his voice rising in sudden anger. "We are not done with this family dinner. You do not just walk away when your parents are speaking to you." I did not pause my stride or turn around to acknowledge his authority. I walked straight through the manicured garden, past the sparkling swimming pool, and out the front gate to where my car was parked on the quiet suburban street. I could hear Monica's shrill voice echoing behind me, telling our parents to just let me go because I always ruined the mood anyway, and that they were better off without my negative energy. I got into my car, locked the heavy doors, and started the engine. The drive back to my luxury high-rise condo in downtown Atlanta was remarkably peaceful. I did not feel the crushing rejection I used to feel when they systematically alienated me. I only felt a cold, sharp clarity taking over my mind. For years, I had kept my massive financial success completely hidden, knowing they would either try to exploit it for their own gain or diminish it to protect Monica's fragile ego. I managed a highly lucrative firm that bought and liquidated millions in distressed debt. I knew the intimate financial secrets of the city's elite, and I knew exactly how deep Spencer was drowning in his own elaborate lies. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting in my spacious home office, bathed in the soft blue light of my multiple computer monitors. My phone buzzed loudly on the glass desk. It was a text message from Monica. It read, "You really embarrassed yourself today. You need to learn to know your place in this family and stop acting so entitled all the time. Spencer is doing big things for us, and you are just holding on to petty jealousy because you have nobody." I stared at the glowing screen, letting the absolute audacity of her words sink into my brain. Know my place. I picked up my phone and typed my reply slowly, ensuring every word carried weight. I do know my place, Monica. I know exactly where I stand. You, on the other hand, should probably check the status of your mortgage. I hit send and tossed the phone aside. Then I turned my undivided attention back to my main computer screen. I logged into my firm's secure offshore database and pulled up the massive digital file labeled Spencer Holdings. With one quiet, decisive click of my mouse, I submitted a digital command to our partnering bank, instructing them to immediately call in the entirety of his defaulted loans and freeze all connected assets. The next morning, at exactly 9:00 o'clock, Monica tried to use her prestigious platinum credit card to buy a designer handbag at a high-end boutique in Buckhead. The machine beeped harshly. It was declined. The dominoes had officially started to fall. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, illuminating the sleek mahogany desk and the scattered financial reports I had been reviewing since 6:00. My phone had been buzzing relentlessly for the past 20 minutes, vibrating against the glass surface with an angry, persistent rhythm. The caller ID flashed my sister's face over and over again. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me before I finally swiped the screen to answer. I did not even get the chance to say hello before Monica's shrill voice pierced through the speaker. "Vanessa, you need to fix this right now." She was not crying. She was furious, her voice tight with that familiar breathless panic she only ever got when her public image was threatened. "I am standing in the middle of the most exclusive boutique in Buckhead and my card just declined. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" The sales associate looked at me like I was some kind of street trash. I handed her my backup card, and that one declined too. "You need to wire me $5,000 right now." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, listening to the frantic background noise on her end. I could hear the hushed, polite murmurs of retail workers and the soft jazz playing in the boutique. Monica was trying to keep her voice down to avoid a public scene, but her absolute entitlement was bleeding through every word. "Why would I wire you $5,000, Monica?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. "Because Spencer's accounts are locked out due to some stupid bank error." Monica snapped her words, rushing out in a defensive flurry. "He said it is just a temporary glitch with the system because they are transferring our assets to a new premium wealth management tier. But I have a charity luncheon in 2 hours, and they are holding a limited edition bag for me. I cannot just walk out of here empty-handed. They know who I am, Vanessa. They know Spencer. It makes us look broke. Just transfer the money from your little savings account, and Spencer will pay you back tomorrow when the bank opens. You owe me anyway for walking out of the cookout last night and causing a scene in front of Dad's guests." I closed my eyes for a brief second, marveling at her sheer audacity. Less than 12 hours ago, she had laughed while her son threw silverware at me and called me the help. Now she was demanding my hard-earned money to save face in a designer store and framing it as if she were doing me a favor by letting me clean up her mess. "I do not owe you anything, Monica," I replied, staring out at the Atlanta skyline. And I am certainly not draining my personal savings to fund your shopping addiction because your husband cannot keep his lies straight. Before Monica could launch into another screaming fit, I heard the sound of the phone fumbling. There was a brief, muffled argument, and then the heavy, arrogant voice of my brother-in-law filled the line. "Listen to me, Vanessa." Spencer's tone was dripping with that specific brand of white corporate condescension he always reserved for me. He spoke slowly and clearly, as if he were explaining a simple concept to a toddler. "I am going to need you to stop being difficult and just help your sister out. I know people who work regular 9-to-5 wage jobs do not really understand how high-level investing works. But when you operate with the kind of capital I do, banks sometimes freeze accounts for security purposes during massive asset transfers. It is a standard liquidity hold." He paused, expecting me to be intimidated by his financial buzzwords. When I remained silent, he continued, his voice taking on an even more patronizing edge. "You clock in and you clock out, Vanessa. You get your little paycheck every 2 weeks, and that is fine for someone in your position. But real wealth is tied up in venture capital and international holdings. My firm just secured a massive funding round, and the banks are updating our profiles. It is a temporary glitch. So I need you to go into your banking app, wire the $5,000 to Monica, and I will throw an extra $500 your way as a tip for your trouble. Think of it as a bonus for finally being a team player." The microaggressions rolled off his tongue so effortlessly. Wage worker, little paycheck, throwing me a tip like I was a valet parking his least luxury car. He was speaking to a woman who personally managed a portfolio worth more than his entire fake tech empire, but his inherent bias and absolute arrogance blinded him to the reality of who I actually was. He genuinely believed his whiteness and his startup jargon made him invincible. I set my coffee mug down on the desk. The quiet click echoed in the large office. "You are right, Spencer," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. "People who work regular wage jobs probably do not understand how venture capital works. But I do not work a regular wage job. I manage distressed assets and corporate debt liquidation, which means I actually understand cash flow better than anyone you have ever met." Spencer let out a dry, condescending chuckle. "Right, your little debt collection gig. Look, Vanessa, I do not have time to debate economics with you. Monica is waiting at the register. Send the wire." "I am not sending anything, Spencer," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany desk. "Because I know for a fact that your bank did not freeze your accounts for a wealth management transfer." "What are you talking about?" His voice dropped, the forced politeness vanishing instantly. "Banks do not initiate security freezes for asset transfers on a Tuesday morning without prior authorization." I explained, my voice cold and precise. "But they do freeze accounts when a federal hold is placed on them. They freeze personal and business assets when they receive an emergency injunction regarding fraudulent activity." There was dead silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Spencer's breathing change, becoming shallow and rapid. The confident tech bro persona was slipping, and I was going to pull it completely off. "I have been reviewing the financial filings for your tech startup for the last 6 months, Spencer." I continued, letting every word strike like a targeted missile. "I know exactly how you secured that last round of funding. I know about the shell companies you set up in Delaware to funnel money back into your own user acquisition metrics. You have been artificially inflating your daily active users by buying fake traffic and then using those fabricated engagement numbers to secure millions from new investors. You are running a digital Ponzi scheme. You are using the new Series B funding to quietly pay off the massive private debts you accumulated during your Series A round." "Shut up," Spencer hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and raw panic. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are just a bitter paper pusher trying to start drama because you are jealous of our lifestyle." "Jealous of a house of cards?" I asked, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "Spencer, your primary investor just pulled out. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not care about your lifestyle. They care about wire fraud. They care about falsified revenue reports. That temporary glitch your wife is dealing with at the register is not a bank error. It is the beginning of a federal asset seizure." "Listen to me, you crazy!" Spencer stammered, his voice completely losing its arrogant drawl. If you breathe a word of this insane conspiracy theory to Monica or to your parents, I will destroy you. I will sue you for defamation. I have lawyers who will bury you so deep you will never work in this city again. You cannot afford your lawyers anymore, Spencer, I replied smoothly. Your accounts are gone. Your credit is gone. That funding you bragged about at the cookout last night is locked down in a federal holding account while the SEC rips your servers apart. You cannot even afford to buy your wife a purse right now, let alone sue me. You! He choked on his words, unable to form a coherent sentence. How do you know this? Who told you this? I did not need anyone to tell me. I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I do not just clean up messes, Spencer. I buy them. And you are the biggest mess I have ever seen. Good luck explaining the liquidity hold to the feds. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button disconnecting the call. The silence in my office returned heavy and satisfying. I placed the phone face down on my desk and picked up my coffee mug again. It was still warm. I took a sip, turned my attention back to the glowing monitors, and opened the next file. The day was just getting started and they had no idea how much worse it was going to get. My desk phone barely had time to cool down before my personal cell began vibrating against the glass. The caller ID flashed my father's name. DeAndre Wilson did not call me during business hours unless he needed someone to yell at or someone to fix a problem his golden child had created. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. His voice was a low, authoritative rumble demanding my immediate presence at the family estate. He did not ask if I was busy. He did not ask if I was working. He simply stated that this was a family emergency and that I had exactly 40 minutes to get there. The drive to their sprawling suburban neighborhood was a blur of morning traffic and rising temperatures. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of their subdivision and parked my car behind my father's pristine luxury sedan. The house looked exactly as it always did, a perfect monument to their obsession with social status. The lawn was impeccably manicured, the white columns gleamed in the sunlight, and the heavy oak front door practically screamed old money. But I knew the truth. It was all a carefully constructed stage play. I walked through the heavy front doors and was immediately directed to my father's study. The room smelled of expensive cigars and lemon pledge. My father was pacing behind his massive mahogany desk, wearing a tailored suit jacket without the tie. My mother sat stiffly on a leather Chesterfield sofa, clutching a tissue. Her eyes were red, but I knew Brenda well enough to know those were tears of frustration, not genuine sorrow. Monica was apparently upstairs, sedated by anxiety medication because her morning shopping spree had been brutally interrupted by the reality of her husband's frozen accounts. Sit down, Vanessa, my father ordered, pointing to a rigid wooden chair opposite his desk. I remained standing. I have a company to run, Dad. What is the family emergency? My father stopped pacing and leaned heavily on his desk. Spencer is experiencing a temporary liquidity crisis. The banks are conducting a routine audit for his new funding round and his accounts are locked. It is a massive misunderstanding, but it has left them completely exposed. Monica called us in hysterics from Buckhead. She told us you refused to help her out of a simple jam. I did not refuse to help her out of a simple jam. I replied, my voice steady. I refused to empty my savings to fund her luxury shopping habits while her husband is under federal investigation. My mother gasped, pressing the tissue to her chest. Do not you dare speak about Spencer that way. He is bringing generational wealth into this family. He is a visionary. You just do not understand the pressure he is under. My father held up a hand to silence her. Listen to me, Vanessa. Spencer needs a bridge loan to cover his operational costs and maintain his lifestyle image until the bank clears this up. We cannot have his wealthy investors thinking he is insolvent. We must protect the family image in front of his elite circles. We have already extended ourselves to help him with the initial startup costs, so our liquid capital is tied up. But you have excellent credit. You live a remarkably boring life. You have no husband, no children, and no real expenses. He looked at me with a cold, calculating stare. I need you to go to your bank this afternoon and take out a $200,000 personal loan. You will wire the money directly to Spencer's secondary account. He will pay you back with interest the moment his funding clears. The sheer absurdity of his demand hung in the air like a physical weight. $200,000. My father was standing there in his custom-tailored suit, ordering me to plunge myself into massive personal debt to save a white con artist who had spent the last 5 years treating me like the hired help. They did not know that my firm was the one orchestrating the asset seizure. They just thought I was a convenient, reliable piggy bank they could smash open to protect their precious son-in-law. I stared at my father, taking in the absolute entitlement etched into his features. No. The words slipped out of my mouth calmly, effortlessly. My father blinked as if he had misheard me. What did you just say? I said no. I am not taking out a loan for Spencer. I am not giving Monica a dime. And I am certainly not risking my financial future to protect the fragile ego of a man who is currently lying to all of you. My mother shot up from the leather sofa, her face twisted with sudden rage. You selfish, bitter girl. She spat the words out like venom. Your sister is upstairs crying her eyes out because her husband is facing a stressful business hurdle, and you cannot even do the bare minimum to support your own blood. You have always been like this, Vanessa. You have always been so jealous of Monica. You cannot stand to see her happy. You cannot stand that she married a successful white man who elevates our family standing while you sit alone in a depressing apartment. The injustice of her words ignited a fire in my chest that had been smoldering for over a decade. The utter hypocrisy of them demanding my financial sacrifice after everything they had put me through was too much to bear in silence. Support my own blood, I asked, stepping closer to the mahogany desk. Let us talk about family support, Mother. Let us talk about what happened when I was 18 years old. My parents exchanged a brief, uncomfortable glance, but I did not let them interrupt. I worked every single day after high school. I saved every paycheck from my retail jobs and my tutoring gigs because you told me I needed to contribute to my college fund. I got accepted into an excellent university. And then a month before my tuition was due, I went to the bank and found out the account was empty. My voice was rising now, filling the heavy silence of the study. You drained my entire college fund, every single cent I had worked for and everything my grandparents had left me. And what did you do with it? You used it to pay for Monica's lavish country club wedding. You bought ice sculptures and imported champagne and a designer gown so you could show off to Spencer's arrogant family. You left me with nothing. That was different, my father interjected, his voice defensive. Monica was marrying into an important world. We had to make the right impression. We knew you were smart enough to figure out student loans. You always were the practical one. Practical! I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Practical is just your word for neglected. I took out $70,000 in student debt. I worked 3 jobs during college. I slept in my car for a month between semesters because I could not afford a dorm. I built my career from the absolute bottom while you completely ignored my existence. You never invested a single dime in me. You never showed up to my graduation. You never asked how I was surviving. And now you have the absolute nerve to demand I take on $250,000 in debt for a white tech bro who runs a Ponzi scheme. He is not running a Ponzi scheme, my mother shrieked, covering her ears as if my words were physically assaulting her. You are just a hateful, angry black woman who wants to drag her sister down to her level. Spencer is a genius. Spencer is a criminal. I fired back, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. He lied to you. He lied to his investors. He mortgaged his fake company on false projections, and now the federal government is coming to collect. I am not saving him, and I am not saving you from the embarrassment of associating with him. My father slammed his fist against the mahogany desk, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You will do as I say, Vanessa. I am the head of this family, and I am telling you to go to the bank right now. I will not let your petty childhood grievances destroy the empire Spencer is building for us. As he slammed his fist down, the impact rattled the desk. A tall stack of manila folders near the edge tipped over, sliding across the polished wood and spilling onto the Persian rug at my feet. My father cursed under his breath and bent down to pick them up, but I was closer. I kneeled down to gather the scattered papers, my eyes automatically scanning the heavy black text on the top document. My blood ran completely cold. The logo at the top of the page belonged to Trident Financial Group. That was my firm. It was the exact subsidiary department that handled high-risk property liens and distress collateral. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was a cross-collateralization agreement and a heavily notarized deed of trust. I grabbed the papers, pulling them out of my father's reach as he swiped at them. "Give those back to me, Vanessa," he demanded, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "Those are private family documents." I stood up, clutching the papers, my eyes darting rapidly over the legal jargon and the bolded figures. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs as the horrifying truth locked into place. I looked at the property address listed under the collateral section. It was not Spencer's mansion. It was the address of the ancestral home located in the historic south side of Atlanta. The beautiful old house my grandfather had worked grueling factory shifts for 40 years to pay off. The house that was supposed to remain in our family for generations. "What did you do?" I whispered, looking up at my father. My voice was completely hollow, stripped of all the anger from just moments before, replaced by a sickening wave of shock. "It is none of your business," my father said, refusing to meet my eyes. He straightened his jacket, looking anywhere but at me. I flipped to the second page, my hands shaking slightly. I saw my father's signature and my mother's signature right next to Spencer's. "You put up Grandpa's house." I said the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You secretly signed over the ancestral home as collateral to guarantee Spencer's early business loans. You bet our entire family legacy on his fake startup." My mother stepped forward, her chin lifted in defiant pride, even as her hands trembled. "We did what we had to do, Vanessa. Spencer needed liquid assets to secure his first round of major investments. He promised us a tenfold return. When his company goes public, we will be able to buy 10 houses just like that old thing in the South Side. It was a strategic investment in our daughter's future." "You fools!" I breathed out, staring at the two people who had raised me. "You absolute delusional fools. He is never going public. There is no money. He has defaulted on everything." "Stop lying," my father bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He just hit a temporary snag. Once you secure this bridge loan, everything will be fine. We just need to hold the bank off for a few more weeks." I looked down at the legal documents in my hand. I knew exactly what these papers meant, because I was the one who enforced them. Spencer had defaulted on his primary loans months ago. The bank had already initiated the silent seizure process. And because my parents had foolishly co-signed, using the ancestral home as cross-collateral, the bank now had the legal right to seize their property to satisfy Spencer's massive debts. They had not just given Spencer their money, they had given him the very foundation of our family. They had handed a manipulative white con artist the keys to everything my grandfather had built, just so they could brag at their country club dinners about having a tech CEO in the family. "You are going to lose it all," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "The bank is going to foreclose on Grandpa's house. They are going to take your money. They are going to take Spencer's cars. And they are going to take this house too if your names are attached to any of his other fraudulent accounts." My mother let out a shrill, mocking laugh, but it bordered on hysterical. "You are just trying to scare us. You do not know anything about high finance, Vanessa. You just sort through paper all day. You do not know how to win." I carefully placed the documents back on the mahogany desk, smoothing out the wrinkled edges. I looked at my father, who was sweating profusely under the collar of his expensive shirt, and then at my mother, who was still clinging to her delusions of grandeur. "I do not sort through paper," I said softly. "I liquidate bad debt. And you just made yourselves the biggest bad debt in the state of Georgia." I turned around and walked out of the study, ignoring my father shouting my name and my mother's continuous insults. I walked out of the heavy oak front doors and stepped into the blinding midday sun. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands gripped the steering wheel as the reality of their betrayal washed over me. They were willing to sacrifice my future, my college fund, and my grandfather's legacy, all to protect a man who despised us. I pulled my phone out of my bag and dialed the direct line to my legal department at Trident Financial. My lead attorney answered on the first ring. Draft the foreclosure notices for the Spencer Holdings accounts, I instructed, my voice devoid of any hesitation. Include all cross-collateralized properties. I want the asset seizure initiated immediately. Do not give them a single day of grace. Burn it all down. I hung up the phone, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the suburban estate, leaving them to the absolute ruin they had built for themselves. I had just pulled out of the wrought iron gates of my parents' suburban estate when a sudden nagging instinct forced me to pull my car over to the shoulder of the road. My hands were gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned completely white. The air conditioning in my luxury sedan was blasting cold air against my flushed face, but I felt like I was suffocating. Sitting on the passenger seat next to me was the thick manila folder I had snatched from my father's mahogany desk during our argument. I had already seen enough to know they had recklessly used the ancestral home in the South Side to guarantee Spencer's failing business loans. I had already made the call to my legal department to freeze his accounts. But something about my father's sheer panic when the folder had spilled onto the Persian rug made my professional instincts scream that there was more to the story. In my line of work handling distressed debt and corporate liquidations, you learn to look for the hidden landmines that desperate people try to bury in the paperwork. I put the car in park, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I reached over and picked up the heavy stack of legal documents. The thick bond paper felt rough against my trembling fingers. I began to flip through the pages, carefully reading the dense legal jargon, the amortization schedules, the default clauses, and the cross-collateralization addendums. I read these exact types of contracts for 50 to 60 hours a week. I knew every loophole and every trick. As I bypassed the primary deed of trust, I found a separate section stapled to the back of the packet. It was a secondary guarantor addendum. My brow furrowed in confusion. Banks usually required secondary guarantors when the primary assets were not liquid enough to secure the total amount of the loan. My parents' retirement accounts and the ancestral home must not have been enough to satisfy the aggressive borrowing Spencer had engaged in. The bank would have demanded a co-signer with a pristine credit score, a flawless debt-to-income ratio, and significant liquid assets. I stared at the guarantor line at the bottom of the page, and my blood instantly turned to ice. My entire body went completely rigid, as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the car. Printed clearly in bold black ink was the name Vanessa Wilson. Right beneath my printed name was my personal social security number, and resting on the signature line was a signature scrawled in blue ink. It was my name, but it was not my handwriting. The loop of the V and the sharp slant of the W were unmistakable to me. It was Monica's handwriting. My older sister had forged my signature on my chore charts and high school permission slips when we were teenagers. Now she had forged my signature on a federal financial document guaranteeing a multi-million-dollar loan for her fraudulent husband. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My vision blurred and a high-pitched ringing echoed in my ears. They had not just risked their own future and my grandfather's legacy. They had actively conspired to steal my identity. My own parents had given Spencer and Monica my social security number, likely pulling it from an old tax return they kept in the family safe. They had handed over my flawless credit history, the financial stability I had sacrificed my 20s to build, and chained it to a sinking ship. They had committed felony fraud just to maintain the illusion of wealth for a man who looked down on all of us. The shock morphing rapidly into a blinding white-hot rage. I threw the legal papers onto the passenger seat. I slammed the car into reverse, backed out of the shoulder, and pressed the accelerator hard. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I turned the car around and sped right back toward the suburban estate. I did not care about family decorum anymore. I did not care about keeping the peace or being the bigger person. I was going to tear their pristine facade down to the studs. I parked my car haphazardly in the circular driveway, not even bothering to straighten out. I left my purse on the seat, grabbing only the manila folder. I marched up the brick steps and pushed open the heavy oak front door. It was still unlocked from my previous departure. The house was quiet, the kind of oppressive silence that usually follows a massive argument. I walked down the hallway, the sharp click of my heels echoing against the hardwood floors like gunshots. I reached the study and pushed the door open so hard it slammed against the wall behind it. My father DeAndre dropped his cell phone onto the desk, jumping back in surprise. My mother Brenda was standing near a crystal decanter, pouring herself a very stiff drink. She spun around, her face contorting with immediate irritation when she saw me standing in the doorway. I marched straight up to the mahogany desk and slammed the open folder down right in front of my father. I pointed a shaking finger at the blue ink on the guarantor line. I opened my mouth and let out a scream of absolute fury that tore from the bottom of my lungs. I demanded to know how they got my social security number. I demanded to know how long they had been hiding the fact that they let Monica forge my signature to secure Spencer's garbage loans. My father looked down at the exposed signature, and the last remaining color drained entirely from his face. He began to stammer, stepping back from the desk and raising his hands defensively. He tried to deploy his usual patriarchal authority, but his voice shook with pure cowardice. He claimed it was just a formality. He said the bank underwriters needed a younger guarantor with a high credit score to balance out the risk portfolio. He said Spencer had promised to remove my name from the paperwork as soon as his Series B funding cleared the escrow accounts. He mumbled that they never intended to hurt me, and that it was just a temporary measure to get the tech startup over a crucial financial hurdle. I cut him off, slamming my hand against the desk and demanding to know how they could commit identity theft and risk my entire life without even asking me. I told them they were common criminals masquerading as high society elites. My mother set her crystal glass down on the side table with a sharp clink. She did not look guilty. She did not look remorseful. Instead, she looked profoundly annoyed that I was raising my voice in her immaculate house. This was the toxic dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat, fully weaponized and staring me right in the face. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked at me with an expression of deadpan entitlement. "Your assets belong to this family, Vanessa," she stated, her voice chillingly calm and entirely devoid of empathy. "Spencer is the face of this family right now. He is the one networking with the elite, taking meetings with venture capitalists, and elevating our social standing in the community. He needed capital to project the right image. It is just a signature on a piece of paper. Why are you being so incredibly aggressive and dramatic?" I stared at her, completely paralyzed by the sheer sociopathic nature of her defense. She was justifying a federal crime because she fundamentally believed I existed solely to serve them. My mother took a step closer to me, her eyes narrowing with contempt. "It is not like you have a husband or kids of your own to support, Vanessa. You sit alone in a high-rise condo, hoarding your money while your sister is out here trying to build a dynasty. What else were you going to use that immaculate credit score for anyway? Buying more boring pantsuits for your dreary office job. You owe this family for raising you. You owe your sister support. You should be honored that your good credit could actually be used for something important, instead of just sitting there doing nothing. Spencer is bringing real power to our name, and a little signature from a single childless woman is a small price to pay for the return on investment we are all going to receive." I listened to her monologue, and a profound, terrifying clarity settled over my mind. The white-hot rage that had carried me back to the house suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a vast Arctic emptiness. I realized in that exact moment that these people did not love me. They did not even see me as a human being. They viewed me as a resource, a convenient organ donor for Monica's extravagant lifestyle and Spencer's fraudulent ambitions. They had justified stealing my identity because they genuinely believed that Spencer's status as a white male tech entrepreneur made him inherently more valuable and deserving of my life's work than I was. They were perfectly willing to let me go to prison or face financial ruin just so they could keep bragging at their country club luncheons. The screaming stopped. I did not want to argue with them anymore. I did not want to convince them of my worth or demand the apologies I had been chasing since I was a little girl. I looked at my mother and my father, and I saw nothing but pathetic, desperate criminals who had willingly destroyed their own lives. I reached down and closed the manila folder with a deliberate, echoing snap. I picked it up and held it against my chest. The emotional detachment was total and absolute. I had zero obligation to these people. They were dead to me. Well, good luck to the face of the family, I said, my voice turning completely ice cold. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. My father, finally realizing the danger they were actually in, lunged forward and tried to grab my arm. I stopped and gave him a look so intensely lethal that he immediately dropped his hand and stumbled backward. I did not say another word. I walked out of the study, down the long hallway, and out of the heavy front doors for the very last time. I walked down the brick steps and climbed into my car, locking the doors behind me. The air conditioning washed over me, cooling the sweat on my forehead. I placed the folder containing the forged documents safely into my bag. Then I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the direct emergency line to my firm. My lead attorney, Desmond, answered immediately. "Initiate immediate asset seizure," I commanded, my voice unwavering and sharp. "I want every single account associated with Spencer Holdings completely frozen. I want the eviction and foreclosure notices drafted for all collateral properties, including the cross-collateralized residential address in the South Side. And Desmond, contact the Federal Fraud Unit. I need to flag the secondary guarantor signatures on these loans for malicious forgery and identity theft. Execute it all right now." The click of the phone ending the call with Desmond felt like the turning of a heavy vault door, sealing Spencer inside his own destruction. I drove back to my downtown office, my mind perfectly clear and ruthlessly focused. Within 48 hours, the financial blockade we initiated tightened around Spencer like a python. He tried to secure emergency bridge loans from every shadow lender and high-interest boutique firm in the city. But my team had already flagged his social security number and corporate tax ID across all major credit bureaus. His accounts were completely paralyzed. He could not buy a cup of coffee, let alone cover his massive operational debts. The luxurious facade he had built to dazzle my parents was rapidly disintegrating, and it was an absolute masterpiece to witness. It started with the cars. I received a notification from our asset tracking software that the title for his leased Aston Martin had been quietly transferred to a shady dealership just outside the city limits. He was liquidating whatever he could get his hands on for pennies on the dollar just to generate untraceable cash. The exotic vehicles he paraded around the country club were vanishing into the night, repossessed or sold off to cover his immediate panic. 2 days later, Monica called me. She did not sound like the arrogant socialite who had demanded a $5,000 wire transfer earlier that week. She sounded like a wounded animal. I answered the phone and her voice cracked immediately, breaking into harsh, ugly sobs. She screamed that I was a monster, that I had ruined her perfect life and destroyed her family for no reason. Amidst her hysterical cursing and crying, she confessed the real reason she was calling. She had gone into her custom velvet-lined jewelry safe to retrieve her diamond Rolex for a country club brunch, only to find it missing. She frantically checked for her tennis bracelets and her imported sapphire necklace. They were all gone. Spencer had secretly pawned her entire jewelry collection while she was sleeping. He told her it was just a temporary sacrifice to keep the business afloat and promised to buy them back with interest, but she knew he was lying. The absolute desperation in his eyes had terrified her. She demanded that I fix it. She screamed that Dad was having severe chest pains because the bank had sent the first official foreclosure notice to the ancestral home. She begged me to drop the asset seizure, claiming that we were blood and that I had to show mercy because she was a mother. I listened to her pathetic apologies and remembered every single time she had mocked my dark skin, my practical career, and my intrinsic worth. I remembered her standing in that beautiful manicured garden, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet and telling me to go fetch her son a plate of ribs. I told her that the help does not hand out charity to women who allow their husbands to steal from their own family. Then I hung up the phone and permanently blocked her number. I sat at my desk and let the absolute silence wash over me. For years, Monica had paraded her wealthy lifestyle in my face, using her husband as a blunt weapon to make me feel small and insignificant. She had stood in my parents' living room wearing those exact diamond watches and designer clothes while laughing as they systematically tore me down. Now the very man she had worshipped as a god of finance was stripping her bare to save his own skin. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. According to our tracking algorithms, Spencer was running out of options fast. The secondary luxury cars disappeared next. The custom Porsche he used to drive to his tech conventions was repossessed in the middle of the night. The wealthy neighbors in their exclusive gated community woke up to the sound of tow trucks hauling away the physical proof of Spencer's success. My parents were suffocating under the crushing weight of their own terrible choices. My father, who had proudly handed over the deed to my grandfather's house, was now facing the brutal reality of total bankruptcy and homelessness. He had called my office 12 times begging to speak with me, but I had instructed my receptionist to route all his calls directly to the legal department. They were finally experiencing the exact same helplessness they had forced upon me when they drained my college fund to pay for Monica's wedding. The golden child was losing her shine, and the ultimate savior of the family was being exposed as nothing more than a desperate common thief. I felt absolutely no guilt. They had dug their own graves and gladly handed Spencer the shovel. The federal hold on their accounts meant they could not even hire a decent defense attorney to fight the upcoming charges. They were completely trapped in the crumbling ivory tower they had built on a foundation of lies and forged signatures. The next morning, I was reviewing the latest liquidation schedules when my office door swung open. Olivia, my senior intelligence analyst, and one of the few people I trusted implicitly, walked in holding a thick blue folder. Olivia was incredibly sharp, observant, and entirely ruthless when it came to tracking hidden money across international borders. She closed the heavy glass door behind her and locked it. It was a rare breach of office protocol that immediately told me something massive had shifted in the case. She walked over to my desk and dropped the blue folder right on top of my keyboard. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the mahogany surface, and told me that Spencer was planning to run. I opened the folder and stared at the highlighted bank records and digital transcripts. Olivia explained that her team had been monitoring Spencer's digital footprint and intercepted a series of encrypted communications between his personal laptop and a boutique offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. He had somehow managed to squirrel away roughly $400,000 in an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet months ago, right before our freeze took full effect. Now he was desperately attempting to convert those digital assets into liquid offshore cash. The intelligence report outlined his search history, and it painted a truly pathetic picture of a coward preparing to abandon ship. He was looking into one-way flights to countries without extradition treaties. He was searching for expedited passport renewal services and temporary overseas housing under assumed corporate names. He had absolutely no intention of staying in Atlanta to face the music or protect his precious wife and child. Monica and my parents had sacrificed everything, including my identity, to prop up his fake billionaire image, and he was getting ready to leave them completely destitute to face the federal fraud charges on their own. He was going to let my parents lose their ancestral home and let Monica face the sheer humiliation of public bankruptcy while he sipped expensive cocktails on a tropical beach. Olivia asked me what our exact next move was. She knew how personal this case had become, and she was ready to execute whatever command I gave her. I looked at the offshore routing numbers and felt a cold, sharp smile stretch across my face. Spencer thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. He thought he could outrun the consequences of his actions just because he was a wealthy white man in a tailored suit who used big words. He had underestimated my intelligence from the very beginning, and he was about to pay the ultimate price for that arrogant mistake. I told Olivia to prepare the final strike. I gathered the original forged loan documents, placing them carefully into a secure legal binder. I included the cross-collateralization agreements that bore my fraudulent signature and the accompanying analysis from our independent handwriting expert confirming, without a shadow of a doubt, that Monica had forged my name. I added Olivia's detailed intelligence report outlining Spencer's offshore flight risk and his cryptocurrency conversion attempts. I drove straight to the federal courthouse downtown. The Atlanta air was thick and humid, but I felt completely untethered from the heat. I walked through the heavy stone columns and rigorous security checkpoints, with the purposeful stride of a woman who was finally taking her life back from the people who tried to steal it. I submitted the entire binder to the district attorney's fraud division, formally filing criminal charges for identity theft, bank fraud, and malicious forgery against both Spencer and Monica. I sat with the lead prosecutor and made sure he understood the immediate severity of the flight risk, ensuring that federal warrants would be issued before Spencer could even pack a single suitcase. The moment the documents were officially stamped and logged into the federal database, I walked out of the courthouse and pulled out my tablet. I had one last loose end to tie up to ensure the total destruction of his empire. Sitting on a shaded concrete bench in the courthouse courtyard, I drafted a meticulously detailed email. I attached the irrefutable proof of Spencer's digital Ponzi scheme. I included the inflated user metrics, the fake revenue reports, and the documentation of the Delaware shell companies he used for funneling data and hiding his debts. I loaded the email addresses of every single major investor, venture capital firm, and prominent board member associated with his tech startup. I used an encrypted anonymous server to ensure the email could not be traced back to my firm or my personal accounts. I typed a brief subject line, calling it "The Anatomy of a Fraud," and hit send. The strike was complete. I sat there for a long time watching the city move around me, listening to the distant sirens and the hum of traffic. Within hours, the investors would panic and demand immediate federal intervention to save their capital. The authorities would raid his massive suburban home and seize his passport before he could ever reach the airport. Monica would be facing felony forgery charges for stealing my identity and actively participating in federal bank fraud. My parents would be left with absolutely nothing but the bitter reality of their own blind prejudice and devastating financial ruin. They had called me boring and uninspired. They had called me a bitter paper pusher who did not understand real wealth. They had laughed while a spoiled child threw silver flatware at my chest. But they had completely failed to realize that the dark-skinned practical woman they dismissed as the help was actually the brilliant architect of their complete and utter ruin. I slipped the tablet back into my leather tote bag and walked toward my car, the heavy chains of my traumatic past finally falling away, leaving nothing but sweet, absolute freedom. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala was the undisputed crown jewel of the Atlanta elite social calendar. My sister Monica had spent the last 11 months agonizing over every single meticulous detail of the event. For her, this was not about raising money for sick children, it was about cementing her status at the absolute apex of high society. She wanted everyone to see her as the benevolent, wealthy wife of a tech billionaire. The ballroom at the Four Seasons Hotel had been transformed into a lavish winter wonderland, dripping with imported white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and thousands of flickering candles. It was a monument to excess and illusion. I arrived exactly 1 hour after the cocktail reception began. I did not wear the practical, boring office attire my family always mocked. Instead, I wore a custom-tailored emerald green silk gown that swept the floor with quiet elegance. My hair was perfectly styled, and the only jewelry I wore was a pair of flawless diamond stud earrings that I had bought for myself after closing my first $10 million liquidation deal. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the gilded doors of the hotel, feeling an absolute profound sense of calm. I knew what was about to happen. I knew that the federal agents were already categorizing the evidence I had handed over, and I knew that Spencer was currently living on borrowed hours. I paused at the top of the grand staircase, looking down into the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The room was buzzing with the hushed conversations of the city's wealthiest power players. And right in the center of the room, holding court at table 1, were my parents along with Monica and Spencer. My father, DeAndre, was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, puffing his chest out as he spoke to a local politician. My mother, Brenda, was dripping in pearls, laughing loudly at a joke someone had just made. Monica looked stunning in a silver beaded gown, but there was a distinct rigid tension in her shoulders. She was smiling, but her eyes were darting frantically around the room. She knew the money was gone. She knew Spencer had pawned her real jewelry because the diamonds around her neck tonight lacked their usual fire. They were high-grade cubic zirconia temporary stand-ins to keep up the facade while their world burned to the ground behind closed doors. Spencer stood beside her holding a glass of scotch. He looked awful. His face was bloated and flushed a deep, unnatural red. His tuxedo looked slightly disheveled, and he was sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning in the ballroom. He was playing the part of the triumphant tech genius, but he was physically vibrating with pure panic. He was trapped in a room full of the exact same investors he had defrauded, and he was desperately trying to maintain the illusion that his empire was not currently being dismantled by federal regulators. I glided down the staircase and slipped into the crowd, avoiding their line of sight. I took a glass of vintage champagne from a passing waiter and positioned myself near the main stage. A few moments later, the lights dimmed, and the master of ceremonies, a prominent local news anchor, stepped up to the acrylic podium. The room fell into a polite, expectant hush. The master of ceremonies began his practice speech, thanking the wealthy donors and highlighting the hospital's achievements over the past year. My parents beamed, looking around the room as if they personally owned the hospital. Monica adjusted her posture, preparing for her moment in the spotlight. After the introductory remarks, the master of ceremonies shifted his focus to the major financial contributors of the evening. "We want to take a special moment to recognize our platinum sponsors," the anchor announced, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "These are the extraordinary individuals and corporate entities who have generously donated $50,000 or more to our cause tonight." My parents puffed their chests out further, waiting for Spencer's fake company to be called. They had bragged to everyone that Spencer was the primary benefactor of the gala. "We have a new platinum sponsor joining us this year." The master of ceremonies continued reading from his gilded card. "Please direct your attention to the stage and join me in welcoming the managing director of Trident Financial Group, Vanessa Wilson." The polite applause began to ripple through the massive ballroom. But at table 1, the reaction was instantaneous and violently physical. My father dropped his crystal water glass. It hit the table with a sharp clank, spilling ice across the pristine white tablecloth. My mother literally choked on her breath, her hand flying to her throat in absolute shock. Monica froze, completely paralyzed, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. But it was Spencer's reaction that was the most satisfying. All the blood drained from his bloated, flushed face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. The name Trident Financial Group hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He finally realized who I actually was. He finally realized that the quiet, dark-skinned sister he had relentlessly mocked and dismissed as a lowly paper pusher was the exact corporate entity that held the keys to his entire destruction. I handed my champagne glass to a nearby waiter and walked confidently up the steps to the stage. The emerald silk of my gown caught the spotlight as I approached the podium. I looked out over the sea of faces and locked eyes directly with my family at table 1. They looked so incredibly small. The mighty Wilson family, who had built their entire identity on tearing me down, were staring up at me in absolute terrified silence. I delivered a brief, elegant speech about the importance of giving back to the community and the value of transparent, ethical business practices. I made sure to emphasize the words transparent and ethical, letting them hang in the air just long enough for Spencer to feel the invisible noose tightening around his neck. When I finished, the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. I smiled, nodded to the master of ceremonies, and walked gracefully off the stage. I did not return to the main floor. Instead, I walked past the velvet curtains and slipped through a set of heavy glass doors onto a secluded outdoor balcony that overlooked the glittering Atlanta skyline. The night air was warm and humid, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and city exhaust. I leaned against the cool stone railing, listening to the muffled sounds of the gala inside. I knew it was only a matter of time before he came looking for me. Less than 3 minutes later, the heavy glass doors burst open. They slammed against the exterior brick wall with a violent shattering crash that made the glass rattle in its frame. Spencer stormed out onto the balcony, his chest heaving, his hands balled into tight, trembling fists. The polite, condescending tech bro mask had completely melted away. There was no more fake Southern charm. There was no more corporate buzzword jargon. He was stripped down to his absolute core, and his core was nothing but raw, venomous racism and fragile white male entitlement. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled, stalking toward me. His breath smelled overwhelmingly of cheap scotch and stale fear. "You think you are so smart, do not you? You think you can just buy your way onto a stage and humiliate me in front of my investors?" I did not move. I did not flinch. I just watched him unravel. He stopped a few feet away from me, pointing a trembling finger in my face. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. "You are nothing." He spat the words dripping with vitriol. "You think a bitter black woman like you can take me down? You think because you wear a fancy dress and work for some predatory debt firm that you are suddenly in my league? You are garbage, Vanessa. You have always been garbage. Your own parents know it. That is why they bet the entire house on me instead of you. Because I am the future, and you are just a resentful, ugly spinster who cleans up other people's messes." His voice was escalating into a frantic, hysterical screech, but I remained completely silent, letting him dig his grave deeper with every word. His racist and sexist superiority complex was so deeply ingrained that even as his world collapsed, he still believed he held the ultimate power. "I will sue you into bankruptcy," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I will ruin you. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I have connections that a low-class public school girl like you could not even dream of. I play golf with federal judges. I have state senators on my payroll. I will make one phone call, and your entire firm will be investigated for corporate espionage. I will have your license stripped. I will make sure you end up working in a fast food drive-thru for the rest of your miserable life. You messed with the wrong man, you stupid little paper pusher. I am Spencer Blackwood. I am untouchable." He stood there breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling as he waited for me to cower. He expected tears. He expected apologies. He expected me to shrink back into the obedient, subservient role my family had always forced me into. He genuinely believed that his white privilege and his fabricated wealth were a magical shield that could deflect federal crimes and massive financial fraud. He thought the world was built to protect men exactly like him and to punish women exactly like me. I looked at him. I looked at his disheveled tuxedo, his sweating forehead, and his wide, terrified eyes. I reached over to a small cocktail table on the balcony and picked up a fresh glass of vintage champagne that a waiter had left behind. I took my time holding the delicate crystal stem between my fingers. The silence on the balcony stretched out tight as a wire. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the cold, crisp champagne, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue. "Sue me with what money, Spencer?" I asked, my voice echoing lightly and pleasantly in the cool evening air. He blinked, the rage in his eyes faltering for a split second as confusion seeped in. I took another unhurried sip of my drink, keeping my eyes locked dead on his. "Your accounts are completely frozen. Your offshore transfers to the Cayman Islands were intercepted by federal authorities at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Your shell companies in Delaware have been seized. You cannot pay your fake employees. You cannot pay your investors. You cannot even afford the gas in your leased cars. I stepped closer to him, the silk of my emerald gown rustling softly against the stone floor. His entire body went rigid. You do not have state senators on your payroll anymore, Spencer, I whispered, my voice laced with absolute lethal satisfaction. You do not have judges playing golf with you. You have absolutely nothing. And the best part is, you just embarrassed your wife in front of the entire Atlanta high society. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His jaw worked uselessly up and down. Sue me? I repeated, a slow, genuine smile finally breaking across my face. You cannot even afford to buy a drink right now. Your check just bounced at the charity bar inside. I turned my back on him, leaving him standing completely paralyzed in the humid night air, and walked gracefully back into the glittering ballroom. The rest of the week passed with a terrifying quietness as the trap finally snapped shut around them. I went to work every single day liquidating assets and managing portfolios while Spencer and Monica desperately tried to plug the gaping holes in a sinking ship. They had no idea that the federal warrants were already signed and sitting on a judge's desk. I spent my evenings in my high-rise condo, watching the city lights and sipping tea, knowing the exact moment their entire reality was going to fracture. Friday morning broke with a crisp, clear blue sky over the exclusive gated community where Monica and Spencer lived. The manicured lawns were practically glowing in the early morning sunlight. The wealthy neighbors were out walking their expensive purebred dogs or jogging in their designer athletic wear. It was the absolute picture of upper-class serenity, a perfect, pristine bubble of wealth and privilege. That serenity was shattered at exactly 6 in the morning when a massive fleet of unmarked black federal SUVs turned off the main road and rolled right past the neighborhood security gates. The private guards did not even try to stop them, stepping back in sheer intimidation as the convoy moved with military precision. The heavy vehicles pulled up to the sprawling circular driveway of Spencer's mansion, boxing in the last remaining luxury car that had not yet been repossessed. Dozens of federal agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI across the back poured out of the vehicles alongside local Atlanta police officers. They did not bother ringing the doorbell or waiting for the maid to answer. They breached the heavy mahogany front doors with a battering ram, shattering the illusion of safety and power that Spencer had hidden behind for years. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the quiet suburban streets, signaling the end of the Blackwood dynasty. According to the official reports I received later, from Olivia, Spencer was sitting in his home office desperately trying to wipe his hard drives and transfer his remaining offshore crypto funds when the agents swarmed the room. His polite corporate mask was completely gone, replaced by the panicked, sweating face of a cornered criminal. They pulled him out of his ergonomic leather chair and slammed him against the wall. They read him his rights while he screamed that he knew powerful people and that this was a massive mistake. He tried to deploy his usual arrogant white privilege, threatening the agents with lawsuits and demanding to call his golf buddies in the state senate. The agents just tightened the cuffs around his wrists and told him his golf buddies were already under investigation for accepting his fraudulent campaign donations. His entire network of corruption was collapsing around him like a house of cards. Monica was still wearing her silk pajamas, standing at the top of the grand staircase, shrieking hysterically as agents began confiscating every computer, tablet, and paper file in the house. She completely broke down, falling to her knees and sobbing as the reality of her ruined life crashed down around her. The agents pulled the fake diamond watches from her vanity and tagged them as evidence. They seized her designer handbags, her imported shoes, and every single asset purchased with stolen funds. Her pristine world of country club luncheons and charity galas was being packed into federal evidence boxes right in front of her eyes. She screamed at the agents, demanding to know how they could do this to a respectable family. She still did not understand that the respectability was a total fabrication. The federal agents marched Spencer out of the front doors in handcuffs. The timing was absolutely perfect for maximum social destruction. The entire neighborhood had gathered on the sidewalks and behind their pristine hedges to watch the spectacle. The women who Monica had tried so desperately to impress at her charity luncheons were now whispering behind their hands and recording the humiliation on their phones. The men who had praised Spencer as a visionary genius were shaking their heads in disgust, distancing themselves from the fallout. Spencer Blackwood, the brilliant tech visionary and the supposed savior of our family legacy, was walked down his own driveway looking like an absolute pathetic mess. The agents loaded him into the back of a federal vehicle, charging him with multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and malicious identity theft. The golden boy was finally going behind bars, where his country club connections could not save him. I was sitting in my downtown office watching the local news coverage stream across one of my monitors. The helicopter footage showed the federal vehicles parked outside their mansion. The news anchor detailed the multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme and the dramatic early morning raid. A deep sense of absolute peace washed over me. It was over. The empire of lies was completely dismantled, but my family still thought they could command me to fix it. My cell phone began to vibrate violently across my desk. The caller ID flashed my father's name over and over again, followed by my mother. They were blowing up my phone with a desperate manic energy. When I did not answer, the voicemails started flooding into my inbox one after another. I put the phone on speaker, leaned back in my leather chair, and let their sheer delusion fill the quiet space of my office. My mother's voice came through, first high-pitched and ragged with hysterical sobbing. She screamed that I had to do something right now. She said federal agents were tearing apart Monica's beautiful home and taking her husband away in front of the entire neighborhood. She begged me to call my legal contacts and make the asset seizures stop. She cried that Monica was completely broken and humiliated and that her social standing was ruined forever. She did not care that Spencer was a criminal. She only cared that the neighbors were watching. She demanded that I drive to the courthouse and use my connections to get the charges dropped, because family is supposed to protect each other no matter what. She said I owed it to my sister to clean up this mess, because blood is thicker than water, and I had the power to make all of this go away. Then my father's voice took over, heavy with panic and a pathetic attempt at maintaining his patriarchal authority. He demanded that I withdraw the forgery charges immediately. He told me the identity theft was just a misunderstanding, and that filing federal charges against my own sister was a disgusting betrayal of our bloodline. He actually had the sheer audacity to tell me that I needed to liquidate my own personal investments to pay for Spencer's federal bail. He said the family reputation was completely ruined, and that if I did not fix this right now, the bank would foreclose on the ancestral home by Monday morning. He pleaded with me, saying that I had to be the bigger person and save my sister from total public humiliation. He said they would forgive my insubordination and welcome me back into the family if I just came to the courthouse with a cashier's check and brought Spencer home. He tried to tell me that Spencer was still the best thing that ever happened to our family, and that we just needed to band together to weather this temporary storm. I could hear my mother wailing in the background, cursing my name, and calling me a traitor for destroying their perfect life. I listened to their frantic voices echoing through the speaker. Even now, as they watched their fraudulent world burn to ash, they still expected me to set myself on fire to keep them warm. They still believed that my sole purpose on this earth was to be their convenient safety net. They wanted me to drop the felony identity theft charges that proved Monica had forged my signature. They wanted me to sacrifice my freedom, my career, and my future for a man who had stolen from innocent investors and treated me like absolute garbage. They had learned absolutely nothing. Their blind protection of the white savior they had chosen over their own daughter was so absolute that it had driven them to madness. They were perfectly willing to lose everything, including the home my grandfather had literally worked his fingers to the bone to pay for, just to maintain the lie that they were better than me. They wanted me to empty my bank accounts to save a man who had spat in my face and a sister who had stolen my identity. I thought back to that summer cookout, to the heavy silver fork hitting my chest and the dark barbecue sauce staining my silk blouse. I remembered the sound of their cruel laughter and the way they had formed a united front of pure arrogance to defend a misbehaving child and a fraudulent husband. They had told me to know my place. They had told me I was just the help. They had assumed my silence was a sign of weakness and that my practical career meant I was financially beneath them. They had built their entire reality around the illusion of Spencer's immense wealth, using me as the designated punching bag to make themselves feel superior. And now that the illusion was shattered, they were begging the punching bag to save them. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel sadness or grief or the familiar sting of rejection. The little girl who had spent her entire life begging for their love and approval was completely gone. I felt nothing but cool, quiet indifference. I reached out and tapped the screen of my phone, ending the voicemail playback mid-sentence. I opened my settings and permanently blocked both of my parents' numbers. I did the same for Monica. Then I held down the power button and watched the screen go completely black. I turned my phone off and placed it inside my desk drawer, closing it with a soft, firm click. The silence in my office was profound and beautiful. I turned my chair to look out the massive window at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The sun was shining brightly, reflecting off the glass skyscrapers. My firm was thriving. My future was entirely my own, and the massive weight I had carried on my shoulders for 29 years had finally been lifted. Outside my window, the city of Atlanta was moving forward, and for the first time in my entire life, I was moving forward too, completely free from the toxic chains of a family that never deserved me. After leaving my phone turned off in my desk drawer, I spent the entire weekend in a state of absolute, untouchable tranquility, while my family spiraled into a living nightmare. I went for long, quiet walks through the city parks. I drank expensive coffee, and I slept better than I had in 29 years. By Monday morning, the crushing weight of reality had finally breached the thick, bulletproof walls of their collective delusion. According to the frantic voicemails I had listened to before permanently blocking their numbers, Monica and my parents had managed to secure an emergency visitor slot at the federal holding facility where Spencer was being detained, pending his bail hearing. The sterile concrete walls, the heavy steel doors, and the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the downtown detention center must have been a brutal, agonizing contrast to the imported marble floors and crystal chandeliers they were accustomed to. My mother, Brenda, wore large, dark sunglasses to hide her violently swollen eyes, holding a designer tissue to her face as she walked through the metal detectors. My father, DeAndre, paced the small visiting cubicle, sweating through his wrinkled polo shirt. His usual booming arrogance entirely deflated by the sheer, humiliating reality of the prison environment. Monica sat in the hard plastic chair, trembling uncontrollably, her expensive silk blouse looking utterly absurd against the backdrop of federal incarceration. She was still desperately clinging to the pathetic hope that her brilliant tech genius husband had a master plan. She genuinely believed Spencer would walk into that visiting room and reassure them that this was all just a temporary misunderstanding orchestrated by a jealous, vindictive sister. She expected him to be the alpha male savior who would magically wave his hands and make the federal indictments disappear. When the heavy steel door buzzed open and Spencer was escorted in, wearing a standard-issue oversized orange jumpsuit with his hands shackled to his waist, the very last remnants of their fantasy began to violently crack. He looked entirely pathetic. The golden boy of Atlanta high society was pale, unshaven, and shaking with severe alcohol withdrawals. Monica rushed toward the thick plexiglass partition, pressing her manicured hands against the smudged acrylic and sobbing his name. She begged him to tell her what to do, and promised that they would liquidate whatever was left to hire the best defense team in the state so they could fight this together. My father stepped forward, trying to deploy his usual patriarchal authority, demanding to know what Spencer's board of directors was doing to squash these ridiculous charges and protect the family name. But Spencer did not look at them with love or reassurance or even a shred of familial loyalty. He looked at them with a disgust so pure and concentrated that it made Monica physically recoil from the glass. He picked up the heavy black receiver on his side of the partition, and his voice crackled through the small metal speaker, completely devoid of his usual polite southern charm. He told them to shut up. He told my father to stop barking orders like a pathetic old dog who did not realize all his teeth had been pulled. The shock on my father's face was absolute and devastating. He had practically worshipped Spencer handing over the deed to my grandfather's hard-earned house just to earn a nod of approval from this man. Now that same man was looking at him like he was dirt on the bottom of his shoe. Spencer leaned closer to the glass and let his polite corporate mask slip, entirely revealing the rotting core underneath. He told them they were the most pathetic, status-obsessed, gullible fools he had ever met in his entire life. He laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that echoed through the bleak visiting room. He confessed that he had deeply despised them from the very beginning. He said he only married Monica because her family was desperate enough for high society validation that they would never ask the right financial questions or demand to see actual bank statements. He called my parents desperate little social climbers who were so incredibly eager to have a white tech entrepreneur in their family photos that they willingly handed over every single asset they owned without a second thought, just to brag at their country club luncheons. He mocked their attempts to act like old money, telling them they were nothing but a joke to his real investors. Monica began to weep uncontrollably, shaking her head and begging him to stop saying these terrible things. She reminded him that she loved him, that she had supported his dreams, that she had even forged her own sister's signature on federal banking documents just to save his failing business. She pleaded with him, saying they were a team and that they had to protect each other against the federal prosecutors. Spencer's expression turned absolutely lethal. He smiled a cold, dead smile and told her there was no team. He informed her that he had just spent the last 4 hours in an interrogation room with federal prosecutors and his defense attorney, negotiating his survival. He told her that the federal government was building a massive airtight case for wire fraud and international money laundering, and he was facing decades in federal prison. But he had found a convenient way to reduce his sentence. He looked right into his wife's terrified, tear-streaked eyes and delivered the ultimate final betrayal. He told Monica he had just given the FBI a full sworn confession, stating that the secondary guarantor addendum was entirely her idea. He had told the federal agents that Monica acted completely alone, forging my signature because her insatiable spending habits and massive credit card debts were bankrupting them. He claimed he knew absolutely nothing about the identity theft and that she had orchestrated the entire fraud behind his back to maintain her lavish lifestyle. My mother let out a strangled gasp and collapsed against my father, sliding down the concrete wall. Monica stared at the man she had worshipped, the man she had mocked me for never being able to attract. He was casually throwing her under a federal bus to save his own skin. He told her she was nothing but a convenient, stupid prop, and that she should get used to wearing orange because the FBI would be coming to arrest her for felony forgery and bank fraud before the end of the day. Then he simply hung up the receiver, stood up and signaled the armed guard that he was ready to go back to his cell without ever looking back at the family he had entirely destroyed. The drive from the federal holding facility to downtown Atlanta must have been the longest, most agonizing journey of their lives. The absolute devastation of Spencer's betrayal had finally shattered the thick, bulletproof glass of their delusion. Monica was no longer the arrogant, untouchable socialite. She was a terrified criminal facing imminent federal arrest and decades behind bars. My parents were no longer the proud patriarch and matriarch of a wealthy elite dynasty. They were entirely broke, destitute, and staring down the barrel of total homelessness because they had literally gifted their legacy to a con artist who hated them. Their golden child was about to be indicted, and their white savior had gleefully handed her over to the wolves. There was only one person left in the entire world who had the power to stop the forgery charges from destroying Monica's life. The exact same person they had abused, degraded, and dismissed as the help. I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a complex liquidation portfolio when the downstairs security desk called up. The guard sounded nervous, explaining that my family was in the marble lobby crying frantically and begging to see me. They were causing a massive scene in front of our corporate clients, and the guard asked if he should have them physically escorted out of the building. I looked at the panoramic view of the city, taking a slow, deep breath. I told him to send them up. I wanted to witness the absolute finale of the tragedy they had written for themselves. When my heavy oak office door opened, I barely recognized the three people standing in the hallway. My mother looked visibly aged, her perfectly styled hair flat and disheveled, her expensive makeup streaked with dark wet tracks of mascara. My father moved with a hunched, defeated shuffle, the arrogant puff of his chest completely deflated, leaving him looking frail and small. Monica looked like a walking corpse. She was hyperventilating, her hands shaking so violently that she could barely hold her designer purse. They stepped onto the thick plush carpet of my office and looked around at the heavy mahogany furniture, the expansive city views, and the undeniable physical proof of the massive power I commanded. They did not demand respect. They did not try to deploy their usual toxic authority or twist the narrative to make themselves the victims of my cruelty. Instead, all three of them collapsed. Monica fell to her knees right in front of my desk, burying her face in her hands and sobbing so hard she was choking on her own breath. My mother dropped to the floor beside her, clutching Monica's shaking shoulder and weeping loudly. My father, the man who had always demanded absolute submission and obedience from me, slowly sank down beside them, his head bowed in total, absolute defeat. They were literally on their knees begging for mercy from the daughter they had completely thrown away. Monica looked up at me, her face a twisted, wet mask of sheer terror. She begged me to drop the forgery charges. She cried that Spencer had turned on her, that he had fed her to the FBI to get a plea deal, and that federal agents were going to take her away and lock her in a cage. She screamed that she was so incredibly sorry that she never should have copied my signature, and that Spencer had brainwashed her into doing it. She claimed she was just an innocent victim of his cruel manipulation, and that she never actually wanted to ruin my perfect credit. She pleaded with me, saying that she was my big sister, that we shared the same blood, and that I could not let her go to a federal prison because she would not survive it. My mother crawled forward on her knees, reaching out with trembling fingers to grab the polished edge of my desk. She sobbed that they had been blind fools. She said Spencer was an evil, calculating sociopath who had tricked them all, making them believe he was a good, honorable man, while secretly draining their retirement accounts and harboring deep-seated hatred for their race. She blamed the entire catastrophe on him, stripping away her own accountability in seconds. She cried that they had always loved me, that they were so incredibly proud of the beautiful, successful, intelligent woman I had become, and that they desperately needed my help to save the family from total annihilation. She begged me to use my firm to pay Spencer's bail so he could not testify against Monica, or to use my high-powered corporate lawyers to force the federal prosecutor to drop the identity theft case. My father chimed in, his voice a pathetic, broken wheeze. He apologized for giving away Grandpa's house. He claimed he was just trying to secure generational wealth for all of us, and that Spencer had lied to him about the Series B funding and the bank loans. He begged me to remember that we were family, and that family means protecting each other against malicious outsiders. He asked me to please save them, because I was the strong one, the capable one, the only one who truly understood how the ruthless financial world worked. I sat in my ergonomic leather chair, perfectly still, resting my hands on the pristine surface of my desk. I looked down at the three people kneeling on my floor, crying and pleading for salvation. They were offering me the exact apologies I had spent my entire childhood praying for. They were finally validating my intelligence, my massive success, and my intrinsic value. They were finally looking at me, not as the convenient scapegoat, but as their absolute superior. But it was all entirely hollow. They did not love me. They did not respect me. They were just absolutely terrified of the consequences of their own actions. They were only apologizing because the monster they had worshipped had finally turned his teeth on them. If Spencer's digital Ponzi scheme had actually succeeded, they would still be laughing at me at their country club luncheons. If Monica's sloppy forgery had not been caught, they would have gladly let my financial history burn to ashes to keep her dripping in fake diamonds. They were not sorry for what they did to me. They were only sorry that they got caught and that the bill had finally come due. I looked at my mother, my father, and my weeping sister. I let the silence stretch out, allowing them to feel the absolute crushing weight of my total indifference. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I simply looked at them with the cold, detached professionalism I reserve for bankrupt corporate entities that were no longer financially viable. I reached across my desk, picked up my sleek silver office phone, and pressed the direct button for security. I told the guard that the visitors in my office were trespassing and needed to be physically escorted out of the building immediately. Monica let out a blood-curdling scream of pure despair as my mother collapsed completely against the carpet. I hung up the phone, turned my chair toward the expansive window, and went back to work, letting the sounds of their pathetic sobbing fade into absolute nothingness as the security guards dragged them away forever. The heavy hands of my corporate security guards descended onto my father's shoulders and grabbed Monica by the arms to haul them up from the carpet. But before they could drag my weeping family out of my office, I raised a single hand. "Wait!" I commanded, my voice cutting through the humid air of the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. The guards immediately froze, holding my struggling sister and my defeated parents in place. I slowly stood up from my ergonomic leather chair and walked around to the front of my mahogany desk, looking down at the three people who had spent my entire existence making me feel like I was inherently defective. My mother was still gasping for air, her tears ruining her expensive silk blouse, while my father stared at the floor completely incapable of meeting my eyes. Monica was shaking so violently, she looked like she might physically fall apart right there on the plush carpet. I wanted them to hear exactly what I had to say before they were thrown out into the street. I wanted the reality of their own toxic choices to echo in their ears for the rest of their miserable lives. "You come in here and you get on your knees and you beg for my forgiveness," I said, my voice dangerously quiet and entirely devoid of any warmth. "You cry and you plead and you tell me that Spencer is an evil sociopath who tricked you. You want me to believe that you are victims just like me. But we all know that is a pathetic lie." I knelt down slightly so I was at eye level with my mother. "You did not care when he was spending my future to buy you expensive dinners. You did not care when Monica forged my name on federal documents and chained my immaculate credit score to a sinking ship. You sold me out to protect him. You threw your own flesh and blood to the wolves because you were so incredibly desperate to maintain the illusion of high society wealth." My mother let out a strangled sob, trying to reach for my hand, but I pulled back in disgust. "You are not crying because you realize you were terrible parents," I continued, standing back up and looking down at them. "You are not begging for forgiveness because you suddenly grew a conscience and realized how deeply you abused me. You are crying because the money ran out. This apology is not born out of remorse, Mother. It is born out of bankruptcy. You are only on your knees because the golden boy you chose over me just handed you over to the FBI to save his own skin. If his massive digital Ponzi scheme had actually worked, and if he had somehow managed to steal enough money to cover his tracks, you would still be sitting at your country club luncheons laughing at me for working a boring corporate job. You would still be letting Monica wear her diamond tennis bracelets while telling me I needed to learn my place. You do not regret destroying my life. You only regret that you bet on the wrong horse and lost." My father finally looked up, his face pale and slack with pure cowardice. "Vanessa, please," he wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "We are your family. We raised you. You cannot just let us lose everything. We will have nothing left." "You made your choice, Dad," I replied, staring at him with absolute zero empathy. When I came to the house and showed you the forged signature, you looked me right in the eye and told me it was just a formality. You told me to sacrifice myself for the good of Spencer's fraudulent empire. You actively protected a criminal because you wanted to pretend you belonged to a social class that actually despises you. You traded your dignity, your integrity, and your own daughter for a temporary taste of fake luxury. And now the bill is finally due. Monica let out a loud, hysterical wail, struggling against the security guard's grip. "Vanessa, I am going to prison!" she screamed, her face contorted in sheer terror. "Spencer told the feds I orchestrated the whole thing. They are going to arrest me. I have a child. Vanessa, you cannot let them take a mother away from her child. You have the money, you have the lawyers, you can make this stop." I looked at my older sister, the golden child who had spent decades making sure I knew I was ugly, unwanted, and inferior. I looked at the woman who had happily stolen my social security number to buy luxury cars and designer handbags. "Well, Monica," I said, my tone dripping with icy satisfaction, "it sounds like you should have thought about your child before you committed felony identity theft and federal bank fraud. You played a stupid game, and you won the ultimate stupid prize. I am not your human shield anymore. I am not your scapegoat. I am the architect of your consequences." Just as I finished speaking, the heavy glass door of my office swung open again. Desmond, my lead attorney and right-hand man, walked into the room carrying a thick stack of manila folders. He was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, and his expression was entirely unreadable, a mask of pure legal professionalism. He glanced at the pathetic scene on the floor with mild disdain before walking directly over to my desk. The timing of his arrival was absolutely perfect. "I have the final updates from the liquidation division," Vanessa, Desmond said, his voice smooth and authoritative, completely ignoring my weeping family. "The federal authorities have officially frozen all corporate and personal assets belonging to Spencer Blackwood and his associated shell companies. The FBI raid this morning secured all physical evidence, and he is currently being held without bail due to extreme flight risk." Monica began to sob even louder, choking on her tears, but Desmond did not even flinch. He simply turned his attention to my father, holding out one of the thick manila envelopes. He looked down at my father with the cold calculation of an executioner. "DeAndre Wilson," Desmond said, his tone dropping an octave, "I am formally serving you with these documents on behalf of Standard Premier Bank." My father stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake, his hands trembling so violently he could barely raise them. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cracking with sheer dread. "These are your eviction and foreclosure notices," Desmond stated clearly, letting the words echo through the large office. "As you are fully aware, you and your wife signed the ancestral home in the South Side over as secondary cross-collateral for Spencer Blackwood's commercial business loans. Because Mr. Blackwood has defaulted on those loans, and because his accounts are currently seized under federal fraud investigation, the bank has officially exercised their right to collect on the secondary collateral." My mother let out a horrific, blood-curdling scream, dropping her head onto the carpet and pulling at her hair. "No, no, you cannot!" she shrieked hysterically. "That is our home. That is my father's house. You cannot take it. We have lived there for 30 years. Desmond did not show a single ounce of pity. He dropped the heavy envelope directly into my father's shaking lap. "The bank has already assumed ownership of the property," Desmond continued relentlessly. "You are considered delinquent occupants. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises and remove your personal belongings. If you do not leave within the 30-day period, local law enforcement will arrive to physically remove you and change the locks. Any items left inside the house will be auctioned off to recoup the bank's losses." My father let out a broken, animalistic sound, clutching his chest as he stared at the foreclosure papers. The ancestral home was his ultimate pride and joy. It was the physical manifestation of his generational wealth, the grand suburban estate he used to prove his superiority over everyone else. He had spent his entire life bragging about the square footage, the manicured lawns, and the custom wrought iron gates. And now, because he had blindly trusted a racist con artist who hated him, he was losing it all. He was going to be homeless. He was going to be a bankrupt, destitute old man with absolutely nothing to his name. Vanessa, please, he begged, trying to crawl toward me on his knees. Please buy the house. You have the money. You can buy the debt from the bank. You can save the house. Please do not let them take it. I will do anything. I will get on my knees and apologize every single day for the rest of my life. Just please do not let us be thrown out into the street. I looked at him, feeling a vast, cold, Arctic emptiness where my love for him used to reside. I have absolutely no interest in buying a house tainted by your pathetic choices. Dad, I said softly. You literally handed the keys to my grandfather's legacy to a man who called you a gullible fool. You threw away your own home just so you could pretend you were elite. You do not deserve that house, and you certainly do not deserve my money to save you from your own staggering stupidity. I looked at Desmond and gave him a brief nod. Desmond turned to the security guards who were still standing by, ready for their orders. Remove them from the premises, Desmond commanded smoothly, and ensure that their names and photographs are permanently flagged at the security desk downstairs. They are never to be allowed in this building again. The heavy-set guards immediately hoisted my father and Monica to their feet, grabbing my mother by the arms as she continued to wail and thrash against them. They dragged my family backward toward the glass doors. Monica was screaming my name, begging me to call the FBI and save her from prison. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably, cursing me for being a heartless monster while mourning the loss of her precious suburban mansion. My father just stared at me with wide, hollow, devastated eyes, clutching the foreclosure papers to his chest, as if holding them tight enough might somehow reverse reality. I stood behind my mahogany desk and watched them go. I did not blink. I did not look away. I watched the security guards pull them out into the hallway, their desperate, pathetic cries echoing against the marble floors, until the heavy glass doors finally swung shut, cutting off their voices entirely. The profound quiet of my office returned, instantly settling over the room like a warm, comforting blanket. Desmond gathered the remaining folders and gave me a respectful nod before quietly exiting, leaving me completely alone in the sprawling space. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window and looked out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. The afternoon sun was catching the glass skyscrapers, casting long, beautiful shadows across the city. My family was gone. Their toxic, suffocating presence was permanently erased from my life. Monica would face the federal justice system for identity theft. Spencer would rot in a federal prison for his massive Ponzi scheme. And my parents would be evicted from their beloved estate, forced to face the reality of their own shallow, bankrupt existence. They had tried to bury me under the weight of their massive deceit, and instead I had emerged stronger, richer, and entirely untouchable. I took a deep breath of the cool, air-conditioned air, letting the absolute peace of my victory wash over every single cell in my body. I was finally free. 30 days passed exactly as Desmond had promised, with the relentless ticking of a clock that could not be stopped or reasoned with. The warm, humid air of a late Atlanta morning clung to the heavy stone pillars of the county courthouse. The wide concrete steps were bustling with local real estate investors, bargain hunters, and county officials holding clipboards. It was Foreclosure Tuesday, a day where the financial tragedies of the desperate were auctioned off to the highest bidder in the blazing sun. Standing awkwardly near the edge of the large crowd were my parents. They looked entirely out of place among the ruthless investors, looking like two pale ghosts haunting the site of their own demise. My mother Brenda was wearing a vintage Chanel suit that hung loosely on her shrinking frame, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses to conceal her tear-swollen eyes. My father DeAndre stood beside her holding a battered leather briefcase that contained absolutely nothing of value. He was sweating profusely, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he constantly checked his heavy gold watch. Even now, on the literal brink of homelessness, their absolute obsession with maintaining social appearances dictated their every move. They had not told a single soul at their country club or their prestigious megachurch about the federal indictments or the bank seizing their ancestral home. Instead, my father had concocted one final, desperate scheme to save his precious ego. He had convinced a wealthy deacon from their congregation, a man named Brother Thomas, to attend the public auction and bid on the property. The plan was incredibly pathetic and reeked of sheer desperation. Brother Thomas would buy the estate at a steep foreclosure discount and then secretly rent it back to my parents, allowing them to continue living in the grand house as if nothing had ever happened. They would rather become tenants in their own home and pay rent to a church friend than admit to their elite social circle that their brilliant son-in-law had bankrupted them. They stood on the courthouse steps whispering frantically to each other, constantly scanning the crowd for Brother Thomas. When the elderly deacon finally arrived wearing a tan linen suit, my parents visibly sagged with relief. My father rushed over to shake his hand, gripping it with a desperation that made the older man look slightly uncomfortable. I stood perfectly concealed behind the thick granite pillar near the top of the stairs, watching their entire pathetic performance unfold. Desmond stood silently beside me, holding a certified cashier's check and a thick folder of corporate documents. We had been waiting for this exact moment for 30 days. The auctioneer, a loud, energetic man with a booming voice, stepped up to the wooden podium and began reading off the list of foreclosed properties. He rattled through several small commercial buildings and modest suburban homes before finally reaching the crown jewel of the morning docket, the Blackwood estate, the sprawling ancestral home my grandfather had built and my father had foolishly thrown away. The auctioneer announced the starting bid, covering the outstanding debt that Spencer had defaulted on. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd of investors. It was a massive property in a highly coveted neighborhood, and the starting price was a fraction of its actual market value. My father nudged Brother Thomas, who calmly raised his numbered paddle to place the opening bid. My mother clutched her designer purse against her chest, a fragile smile of relief finally breaking through her panicked expression. They actually thought they had pulled it off. They actually believed they could manipulate their way out of total destruction and go right back to pretending they were Atlanta royalty. Several other investors raised their paddles, driving the price up slightly, but Brother Thomas kept bidding his pockets deep enough to intimidate the casual flippers. As the numbers climbed, a few competitors dropped out, shaking their heads and lowering their clipboards. My father wiped his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, leaning in to whisper words of encouragement to the deacon. The auctioneer called out the current highest bid, scanning the crowd for any final challengers. Going once, the auctioneer yelled, his voice echoing across the concrete plaza. Going twice. My mother closed her eyes behind her dark glasses, clasping her hands together as if in silent prayer. She was already imagining going back to her pristine living room, sitting on her velvet couch and pretending none of this nightmare had ever occurred. She thought she had outsmarted the consequences of her own horrific choices. I stepped out from behind the granite pillar, my heels clicking sharply against the stone steps. I walked down into the center of the crowd, the bright morning sun catching the sharp lines of my tailored suit. Desmond flanked me, his presence commanding and absolute. The sea of investors naturally parted as I moved to the front, my eyes locked directly on the auctioneer. I did not even glance at my parents, but I could practically feel the oxygen leave their lungs as they realized I was there. I raised my hand and clearly stated a cash bid that was a full $500,000 over Brother Thomas' last offer. The sheer magnitude of the cash bid sent a collective gasp through the crowd. The auctioneer paused, his eyes widening as he registered the astronomical number. Brother Thomas lowered his paddle instantly, his business sense completely overriding whatever flimsy loyalty he had to my father's sob story. My father lunged forward, grabbing the deacon's arm and pleading with him in a panicked whisper. But the older man just shook his head and stepped away thoroughly, washing his hands of the entire situation. My mother pulled down her sunglasses, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror as she stared at me. She finally understood what was happening. She realized I was not there to observe their salvation. I was there to execute their final ruin. The auctioneer called out my bid, asking if there were any other challengers. But the plaza was completely silent. No one was going to outbid a corporate firm wielding that kind of liquid capital. "Sold to the lady in the front," the auctioneer shouted, slamming his wooden gavel down against the podium. The sharp crack of the wood sounded like a gunshot echoing through the humid air, signaling the absolute end of the Wilson family dynasty. Desmond stepped forward smoothly, handing the auctioneer the certified cashier's check and the corporate filing documents proving that my firm now owned the property outright in cash, with 0 outstanding liens. It was the ultimate payoff. I did not just buy a house, I bought the bad debt. I bought the land my grandfather bled for. I bought the very roof over their heads. I was officially the sole undisputed owner of their entire existence. I turned around slowly and faced my parents. They were standing completely frozen on the courthouse steps, looking like 2 shattered statues. My father was trembling, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. His grand illusion of patriarchal power was entirely gone, replaced by the terrified realization that his youngest daughter, the one he had discarded like garbage, now owned his entire world. My mother took a shaky step toward me, her hands outstretched, pleading. "Vanessa," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Please, honey, you bought the house. You saved the family home. We can go back now. We can all go home. You can live with us. We will make up the guest room for you." I looked at her delusion, her pathetic inability to grasp the finality of her situation. "I did not buy the house to save you, Mom," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the murmurs of the departing crowd. "I bought it because it was a solid real estate investment for my portfolio. I bought it because Grandfather would have wanted it to belong to someone who actually knows its value." My father stumbled forward, his face pale and slick with sweat. "But where are we supposed to go, Vanessa?" he begged, his voice breaking. "The bank took the cars. The feds froze the accounts. We have nothing. We cannot pay rent. You cannot throw your own parents out into the street." I tilted my head, studying the man who had sat at a lavish dinner table and allowed his fraudulent son-in-law to humiliate me. I remembered how he had told me I was just a bitter, jealous girl who would never understand true success. I remembered how he had handed my grandfather's legacy to a criminal just to impress his golf buddies. "You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises," I told them, my tone completely devoid of any emotion. "Desmond has already dispatched a private security team to the property. They will supervise your packing to ensure you do not take any fixtures, appliances, or assets that now legally belong to my firm. If you are not gone by the end of the month, the local sheriff will physically remove you." My mother let out a devastated wail, clutching her stomach as she dropped to her knees on the dirty concrete steps. She sobbed uncontrollably, begging God to tell her why this was happening, crying that she was going to be a homeless beggar. The country club friends she had spent her life trying to impress were walking out of the courthouse, avoiding eye contact and whispering behind their hands as they witnessed her total public breakdown. My father stood over her, looking completely broken, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. He did not have the strength to yell or demand obedience anymore. The realization that he was entirely powerless, that the daughter he had thrown away was now his ultimate judge and executioner, had finally broken him. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel any lingering sadness or the ghost of familial guilt. I just felt a clean, beautiful emptiness. I turned my back on them, leaving them weeping on the courthouse steps surrounded by strangers. I walked toward my waiting car, Desmond opening the door for me. As I slid into the quiet leather interior, I looked out the tinted window one last time. The Wilson family was utterly destroyed. Their empire of lies burned to the ground and scattered to the wind. And as the car pulled away, heading back toward the sprawling city I had conquered, I knew that the little girl who had spent her life begging for their love was finally permanently laid to rest, replaced by a woman who would never be broken again. The weeks that followed my departure from the courthouse brought the swift and absolute hammer of the federal justice system crashing down on the shattered remains of my family. There was no miraculous rescue, and no legal loophole that could save them from the staggering consequences of their own toxic greed. The federal prosecutors did not hold back. They methodically dismantled Spencer's fraudulent empire piece by piece, exposing every stolen dollar and every falsified document. His highly publicized trial was a total media spectacle, an absolute feast for the local news networks that loved nothing more than watching a wealthy tech visionary fall from grace. When the final verdict was read, the judge did not show a single ounce of leniency. Spencer, the arrogant golden boy, who had built his entire identity on the illusion of immense wealth and white privilege, was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There would be no early parole and no comfortable white-collar resort prison for him. The heavy steel doors of the federal facility slammed shut on his life permanently, stripping him of his tailored suits, his country club memberships, and his suffocating arrogance. He was reduced to nothing but an inmate number locked away in a concrete cell for the best years of his life, entirely forgotten by the high society elite who had once praised his genius. Monica narrowly managed to avoid a prison sentence by fully cooperating with the federal investigators and turning over every single piece of evidence she had against her husband, but her freedom came at the ultimate price. The government seized absolutely everything. Her imported sports cars, her designer wardrobes, her sparkling fake diamonds, and the sprawling mansion were all liquidated to pay restitution to Spencer's victims. Stripped of the wealth that had defined her entire existence, Monica was forced to pack her few remaining permitted belongings into garbage bags and move into a tiny rundown apartment on the very edge of the city limits. The cramped one-bedroom unit smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cleaning products. A brutal far cry from the pristine marble floors she was accustomed to. With zero work experience and a highly publicized federal fraud scandal attached to her name, no reputable company would even consider hiring her. To support her young son Jackson, Monica was forced to take on grueling night shifts at a massive big box retail store. The golden child who had spent her entire life mocking my practical career and treating me like the help was now spending her nights sweeping dirty linoleum floors and unloading heavy boxes of inventory under harsh flickering fluorescent lights. She had to wear an ugly polyester uniform and a cheap plastic name tag, taking orders from managers who were a decade younger than her. The sheer humiliation of her new reality was absolute. There were nights when former acquaintances from her country club luncheons would happen to walk down the aisles of the store, and Monica would have to quickly turn her face away and hide behind towering displays of toilet paper just to avoid the agonizing shame of being recognized. Her pristine world of ladies who lunch and charity galas was completely dead and buried, leaving her with nothing but aching feet, a minimum wage paycheck, and the crushing realization that she was entirely alone at the very bottom of the social ladder she had once used to look down on me. My parents, DeAndre and Brenda, suffered a fate that was perhaps even more agonizing because it stripped them of the one thing they valued above all else, their social status. After Desmond's private security team escorted them off the ancestral estate, they had no choice but to downsize into a cramped, dark two-bedroom flat in a neighborhood they had spent their entire lives actively avoiding. The massive generational wealth they had constantly bragged about was entirely gone, surrendered to a criminal because of their own desperate classism. Their new flat had peeling wallpaper and thin walls that offered absolutely no insulation from the noise of the busy street outside. But the physical loss of their home was nothing compared to the complete and total social isolation they now faced. The elite congregation at their megachurch and the wealthy members of their country club instantly shunned them. They became social pariahs, a cautionary tale whispered about in the very circles they had tried so desperately to impress. Brenda could no longer host her lavish dinner parties or boast about her brilliant son-in-law. She could barely afford to buy generic brand groceries. There was an afternoon when she saw a former close friend in the produce aisle, and the woman literally turned her shopping cart around and walked in the opposite direction just to avoid making eye contact. DeAndre was entirely stripped of his booming patriarchal authority. He spent his days sitting in a cheap vinyl armchair in their dark living room, staring blankly at the wall, a broken and destitute old man who finally understood the devastating cost of his own blind bigotry. They had sacrificed their only loyal, capable daughter for a lie, and now they had to live the rest of their miserable lives suffocating in the ashes of their ruined reputation. While they suffocated in their self-inflicted misery, I was finalizing the ultimate poetic justice. I held the deed to the massive Blackwood estate, the sprawling ancestral home my grandfather had built and my father had foolishly thrown away. For weeks, investors and real estate developers had been calling my firm offering astronomical sums of money to buy the highly coveted property, but I had absolutely no intention of selling it for profit. The house was the physical manifestation of my parents' toxic pride, their classism, and their desperate need to feel superior. I wanted to take that symbol of exclusion and transform it into something that would serve as a permanent, lingering slap in the face to their bigoted worldview. Working closely with Desmond and my legal team, I drafted the paperwork to donate the entire estate outright, free and clear, to a prominent nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting and housing Black women entrepreneurs. The organization provided startup capital mentorship and secure living spaces for driven independent women of color who were building their own businesses from the ground up. We handed over the keys, the deed, and a substantial operational grant to ensure the program would thrive for decades. The day of the official ribbon-cutting ceremony was beautiful and bright. The nonprofit had installed a gorgeous polished brass plaque right on the front gates of the estate, dedicating the grounds to the empowerment of Black female leaders. It was a sanctuary for women who looked just like me, women who relied on their own intelligence and grit rather than waiting for a white savior to validate their existence. According to the security guards monitoring the property, my father had driven by the estate in his beat-up used car a few days after the opening. He had parked across the street and watched as dozens of brilliant, ambitious Black women walked through the custom wrought iron gates, carrying briefcases and laptops, utilizing the very home he had lost to build their own empires. The sheer brilliant irony of it all must have broken whatever tiny fragments of his ego were still left intact. The very property where my parents had belittled my ambitions was now a permanent monument to female independence and success. The final chapter of this long, agonizing saga closed on a quiet Friday evening. I was sitting in my high-rise corner office overlooking the sprawling, glittering skyline of downtown Atlanta. The heavy mahogany desk was clear of paperwork, and the soft ambient lighting of the room cast a warm, serene glow against the glass walls. My firm had just finalized the acquisition of a massive commercial real estate portfolio, a deal that would secure my financial legacy for generations to come. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and poured myself a glass of incredibly expensive vintage red wine, listening to the soft, comforting silence of my untouchable sanctuary. I picked up my phone to check my personal emails when a notification popped up on the screen. It was a voicemail that had somehow slipped through the carrier filters from a blocked number. I tapped the screen and put the phone on speaker, setting it down on the polished wood of my desk. The voice that filled the quiet office was small, ragged, and thick with tears. It was Monica. She sounded completely unrecognizable, her arrogant tone entirely replaced by a pathetic, desperate wheeze. "Vanessa, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "I know you told me never to call you, but things are so bad. Jackson is asking why we do not have a pool anymore, and I cannot even afford to buy him new shoes for school. They cut my hours at the store and the rent is due. Please, Vanessa, I am begging you. You are my little sister. We share the same blood. I am so sorry for everything I did. Please just give me one more chance. I just need a little bit of money to get back on my feet. Please, sister, do not leave us like this. I sat perfectly still, holding my wine glass and looking out over the city lights as her desperate pleas echoed through the room. I listened to the sound of her crying, to the absolute ruin in her voice, and I waited to feel something. I waited for a twinge of guilt, a spark of familial obligation, or even a rush of vindictive joy. But there was nothing. There was absolutely no emotional tether left tying me to the woman crying on the other end of the line. The little girl who had spent 29 years desperately trying to earn their love had been completely eradicated. The trauma, the rejection, the constant feeling of never being good enough, it was all entirely gone. I reached out and pressed the screen, stopping the voicemail mid-sob. I did not save the message. I did not forward it to my lawyer. I simply pressed the delete button and watched the notification vanish into the digital void forever. I turned off the screen of my phone and slipped it into the top drawer of my desk, closing it with a soft, firm click. I took a slow, deep breath of the crisp, air-conditioned air, letting the profound, beautiful silence of the office wrap around me. I took a sip of the rich, dark wine, savoring the complex flavors as I turned my chair back toward the massive windows. Outside, the city of Atlanta was moving forward, a vast ocean of light and opportunity stretching out as far as the eye could see. I placed my glass down on the desk and reached for the thick, leather-bound contract for my next $1 million deal, flipping open the cover and picking up my favorite silver pen. My past was finally permanently dead and buried, leaving me with nothing but the absolute intoxicating reality of total pure freedom. The greatest lesson I learned is that true family is not defined by blood, but by mutual respect and genuine love. You can never heal in the same toxic environment that broke you, and you do not owe your future to people who tried to destroy your past. Walking away from toxic relatives is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Building success on your own terms is the absolute best revenge. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below, and please subscribe for more stories of survival and vindication.